Hey everybody, welcome. We are going to be going, let's get live with Dracaena wines again. And today we are going to be talking about oxygen and wine. You know, there's so much talk about oxygen and wine and whether this wine is good, bad, or, you know, I'm drinking this wine and those tannins are just so tight. What do we do about that? So that is what we are going to be talking about today, is oxygen and wine. So throughout the winemaking process, you know, the winemaker is always trying to limit the amount of oxygen, but it is really kind of like a balancing act, because too little oxygen, then the wine is reductive, and then, oh, you get that onion smell, and it's really kind of potent. It's like green onions, green scallions is what you're gonna smell. So when you take that wine up to your nose, you get that green onion. That is a reductive wine, okay? And then too much oxygen, then it becomes oxidative, and then you get that nuttiness. So think about an Oloroso sherry, okay, that nuttiness. Now, the sherry is meant to be oxidative, right? You have that floor, that layer of floor, and that's meant to be. But when you're producing wine, you might not want that. Now, again, there are certain varieties of wine that we do want it to be slightly oxidative, and that's the winemaking process, and that's the balance of it. So once it gets past the winemaker and we are in bottle, now we're ready for it to be the way you want it to be, but then you go ahead and you unscrew it and you uncork it, or you do whatever you do to it, and the oxygen comes rushing in. It dives in. And as soon as you do that, there is an effect that's going on. So oxygen comes in, and depending on how much oxygen was in that wine to start off with, you can see by this picture what happens when the oxygen comes in. So it's kind of like a race. As the oxygen comes in, all of a sudden, those aromatics and those flavors do start to open up, they loosen up a bit, and that's kind of why we swirl our glass, is to give little micro-oxygenation. So micro, little bit, versus macro. We don't want macro, okay? At least in the winemaking process. As you're swirling, those aromatics are going to increase, but as you can see by the picture, at some point, those aromatics, in fact, start to decrease, okay? And that's the problem. So what do winemakers do, right? We want to allow, when you open it, we want to have those improvements, right? We want you to be able to taste the wine in the best manner possible. So if you open a bottle, and sometimes it might smell a little sulfury, or even, ooh, that barnyard smell, right? Well, sometimes that's really not a fault in the wine. It just needs to open up. It needs to breathe. It's been bottled up for such a long time that it's closed, right? Think of yourself if you were stuck in a closet, right? You're going to start to close in on yourself. Same thing with the wine. It's going to close. So those SO2 odors, or that barnyard, that can diminish as soon as you open it and you swirl the wine. But let's say there's a lot of tannins in there. There's something that's going on in there. It's just too bold of a wine, right? Well, then oxygen really can help significantly with that. And maybe the swirling isn't going to be enough. So that's where we bring in the decanters or the aerators, right? So we want to make sure that we have this chart in our mind when we decant, or mostly when we decant, that we have this chart in mind, because you can over decant a wine. And there are certain wines that you may not want to decant, like significantly older red wines. You might want to be a little worrisome about decanting, because as they're that old, they get very gentle, they get very fragile. And by pouring it into a decanter, you might damage that wine, you know, for lack of a better word. You might go right past that wines should not be decanted, and then depending on what the wine is, you want, it's going to need to be in that decanter a certain amount of time. So this is a typical decanter. They come in a wide variety of shape sizes, and you know what, to be 100% honest, you don't need to buy a decanter. You can just use any vase. You know, you ever get flowers? then those vases come with the flowers, you can use that. The way this works is that you're pouring the wine into it. Now, in reality, you're supposed to pour gently. We see them dump the whole wine into the decanter. That would be macro-oxygenation. And maybe sometimes wines do need that. That's going to put more oxygen into it and go up to that bell curve faster. But generally, you gently pour it in there to give it the oxygen. Now, the size of the decanter is going to matter as how fast the air, that curve of oxygen, helps to improve those aromas. So more surface area that is there, the more oxygen can get in, and that means you're going to have that curve go a little faster. Best shot, you take it into the decanter and then you taste as you go along, right? So making sure that it doesn't sit in that decanter for too long. So typical reds can really vary between 30 minutes and 2 hours, depending on how much over decanter wine. But if you don't have the patience to sit and let the decanter do its job, then we have aerators, and these aerators work right away. Okay, as you pour through, you can connect it. Some of them, like this image, connect to the bottle itself and aerates it. Other ones you can hold over the glass and you can pour into it. And again, they come in a variety of shapes, sizes, and price ranges. So basically, all we want to keep in mind is that we want to micro-oxygenate, okay? There are things out there that blow my mind, like putting wine in a blender. Oh, yeah, that's going to oxygenate that wine, but it's also going to put that wine through a lot of stressors. Okay, so again, you don't need to spend a lot of money in order to oxygenate your wine. The swirling works. You can get a vase from flowers that work. Even at like the dollar store, you can just get a big jar. Okay, and remember, the slower you pour it in, the gentler it is to the wine. You got to dump it in. That's going to put in more oxygen into it. Okay, so that is what oxygen does to wine. Increases those